Today I'm going to tell you a story so defiant, it still feels dangerous. Set in the raw heart of the American West, where dust hangs heavy in the air. Lantern light flickers against wooden walls, and survival is carved into bone. It's a place where fortunes are made in silence, where reputations can be destroyed in a whisper, and where destiny waits at the edge of every shadow. It began with a single touch at a woman's waist, small, almost unnoticeable, yet powerful enough to tear down walls she had spent years building. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Elara Quinn had been running so long she no longer remembered what it meant to stand her ground. She had run from polished expectations and ironclad obligations from a family that treated her like a bargaining chip, and a high society world that preferred its women silent and shining. She had run from a fiancé she never chose, and a future mapped out without her consent from suffocating parlors heavy with perfume, and judgment from glittering ballrooms that felt more like cages than celebrations. Her father, Victor Quinn, weighed everything in terms of gain money, influence, leverage, and his daughters were entered into that ledger without hesitation. He had 3 girls and assessed them the way a cattleman studies stock before auction. Miriam Quinn, the eldest, had been married off to railroad magnate Dorian Holbrook. Celeste Quinn, the youngest, was promised to Preston Hale, the polished son of a United States senator. And Elara, the middle daughter, the inconvenient one, had been pledged to Ambrose Kincaid, an industrial tycoon old enough to be her grandfather, a man who wanted a young wife to parade through society and warm his sheets at night. She met Ambrose Kincaid only 3 times before the engagement was declared official. Each meeting felt less like a courtship and more like an inspection. He studied her the way a rancher studies a mare posture, teeth, hips, breeding worth. He never once asked what she liked, what she feared, what she dreamed about when she lay awake at night. Her voice did not matter. Her wishes did not matter. She was a polished possession, nothing more, and her feelings were as irrelevant as the chandelier hanging over her father's dining table. The night before the wedding, Elara made the most dangerous choice of her life. She packed 1 small valise. She gathered the cash she had quietly saved from her allowance over the years, and added to it a bold theft, a portion of her own dowry money, meant to seal her fate, though no one had ever asked how she felt about it. Then she ran. She left a note claiming she was visiting a friend, buying herself a few precious hours before the hunt began. She boarded a train heading west, then another, then a stagecoach that rattled across dry country, putting mile after mile between her and the life that had nearly swallowed her whole. She ended up in the Nevada Territory, a dust-bitten mining town so far removed from New York society it might as well have been another world. With the money she had taken, she bought a modest hotel and buried Elara Quinn beneath a new name, Rowan Frost, a young widow who had come west after the tragic death of her husband, Elias Frost. She was 24 when she arrived, young enough to draw glances, old enough to deflect them. The black dresses she wore were more than mourning clothes. They were armor, a warning, a quiet message to every wandering man, unavailable, uninterested, untouchable. Now at 27, she had built something solid from the wreckage she left behind. Her hotel was respectable, if not grand. It catered to traveling businessmen, land agents, and professionals who preferred clean sheets and warm meals over whiskey-soaked saloons along Main Street. She earned a reputation for discretion and sharp management. The establishment was tidy, the food hearty, the prices fair. In that rough-edged town, she became more than someone's daughter or someone's bride-to-be. She became a proprietor, a name, a presence. She had stopped running, but she had not stopped fearing. The fear lived beneath her steady voice and careful smile, a low hum that never quite faded. She feared being found. Victor Quinn's reach was long, and money had a way of crossing any distance. She did not know whether he still searched for her or had erased her from his books as a loss. That uncertainty gnawed at her. Every unfamiliar face made her pulse jump. Every new arrival through her doors sent a flicker of panic through her chest. She feared someone would see past the widow's black and discover the unmarried runaway beneath. If her lie unraveled, everything would collapse. The respectable men who lodged at her hotel would take their business elsewhere. The townswomen who had cautiously accepted her would withdraw. She would be ruined not for fleeing, not for surviving, but for deceiving. So she trusted no one fully. She let no one close enough to see the cracks. For 3 years she kept every soul at arm's length. She was cordial but distant, gracious, but guarded the sort of woman admired from across a room, but rarely approached. She built walls as carefully as she built her new identity. She told herself the solitude was the price of freedom, that loneliness was better than chains. Some nights lying in the small room behind her office, she felt the weight of that solitude pressing against her ribs until it almost hurt. She missed being touched. She missed being truly known. She missed sharing a meal with someone who cared about more than the seasoning in the stew. But she would not risk tearing down the walls that kept her safe. Then Talon walked through her door, and the walls began to splinter. He was Paiute born of the land, long before miners and rail lines carved it apart. He worked as a tracker and guide hired by mining outfits by lawmen, by the occasional fool who wandered too far from marked trails. He moved with the seasons, vanishing into the mountains for weeks, then reappearing for supplies and rest before disappearing again. He first entered her hotel on a bitter autumn night. Wind howled down the street, rattling windows, and the fire in the common room struggled against the cold. He stepped inside, coated in dust from the trail, broad-shouldered, quiet, dark hair tied back with a worn leather cord. His presence shifted the room without effort. He approached the desk and asked in steady, careful English if she had a room available. Dust clung to Talon like a second skin. The trail had painted him in grit and wind, his buckskin shirt faded from weather, his boots scarred by rock and miles. His long black hair was tied back with a worn leather thong, and the kind that had seen more seasons than most men. He stepped to the counter and in calm, deliberate English asked, "You got a room open, behind the ledger?" Rowan Frost, Elara Quinn, beneath the black silk and false mourning, lifted her gaze the way she always did when a stranger crossed her threshold. She measured him in an instant. Weight, bearing, hands, eyes. She catalogued danger the way other women catalogued fabric and lace. Risk had become instinct. Then their eyes locked. Something inside her shifted without permission. A quiet, internal tremor she did not trust. He was striking. That truth hit her before she could shield herself from it. Tall, broad through the shoulders, lean in the way of a man shaped by labor, not luxury. His cheekbones were cut sharp as flint, his jaw firm, his mouth full and deliberate. His eyes were dark, so dark they did not reflect light, but seemed to drink it in. He moved with the kind of easy balance that made other men look stiff and misplaced. And when he spoke, his voice carried low and steady, each word weighed before release. But it wasn't only his looks that unsettled her. It was the stillness, the quiet force in him, the sense that he stood rooted to the earth in a way she had never managed to be. When Talon looked at her, he did not glance past her shoulder or the curve of her waist. He looked directly at her as though he were reading lines no one else could see. For one sharp, terrifying second, she felt exposed. She assigned him a room, quoted a rate, took his payment with crisp efficiency. Professional, controlled, untouchable. Yet when he turned and crossed the common room, she found herself watching the breadth of his back beneath worn fabric, watching the long measured stride, watching the way he moved as though the space belonged to him. She forced herself to look away. Foolishness, that was all it was. A stray flutter beneath her ribs that she buried beneath numbers and schedules and the safety of routine. He was a guest. Nothing more. He would stay a night, perhaps two, and ride on. He did not ride on. That first visit stretched into a full week. He handled business in town he never fully explained, spoke little about himself. And yet, something unspoken began to coil between them. He noticed her. That was the difference. Other men saw Rowan Frost the respectable widow. Talon saw more. He saw when she was bone-tired, though she smiled. He saw the flicker of worry when unfamiliar riders stopped outside. He caught the brief freeze in her posture whenever anyone mentioned husbands or marriage. He caught the faintest cracks in the story of Elias Frost. He noticed details no one else bothered to track. And he noticed her in ways that made heat creep up her throat. More than once she looked up from polishing silver or tallying accounts to find his gaze already on her. Steady, focused, almost tangible. His eyes followed her movements across the room, lingered when she spoke, dropped to her hands as she poured coffee or sorted receipts. He studied her as if she were something rare, something worth memorizing. No man had ever done that. Ambrose Kincaid had examined her like a purchase. Victor Quinn had evaluated her like an asset on a balance sheet. Suitors at society gatherings had circled her like hunters gauging a trophy. Talon looked at her like she was a person, complex, worth knowing. It terrified her. When he finally left after that first week, she told herself she was relieved. The intensity had shaken her carefully balanced world. She would settle back into her quiet life, her walls, her safety. She was not relieved. She missed him. She missed the weight of his attention, the low timbre of his voice, the way the air shifted when he entered a room. Each time the front door opened, she glanced up too quickly. Each night she found herself listening for boots on the stairs. She thought of him while kneading dough, while balancing the books, while lying alone in her narrow bed. And those thoughts were not appropriate for a landlady thinking of a guest. When he returned a month later, her heart betrayed her first, leaping hard against her ribs. Her composure cracked just slightly. He rented the same room, paid for a week in advance, moved through the hotel like he had never left. But this time he talked. It began with easy talk, weather, freight prices, the condition of the northern trails. Then the conversation deepened, inch by inch. He asked about her. Not the widow's tale, not Elias Frost, not the safe version. He asked what she liked to read, what she thought about the rail expansion, what kind of future she imagined for herself. He listened the way he looked, fully, attentive, present. And when he answered, his thoughts were sharp and considered, shaped by experience and quiet intelligence. He made her want to answer more honestly than she should. Before she realized what she was doing, she was telling him pieces of herself no one in Nevada knew. She told him how, as a girl, she devoured novels by lamplight, stories of far-off places and stubborn heroines who refused to bow. She told him how her education, meant to polish her for marriage, had instead taught her to manage accounts, negotiate contracts, and run a business in a world that believed women should be dependent. She did not tell him she was Elara Quinn. But each night they talked, the truth pressed closer to the surface. She told Talon what the work meant to her, the steady satisfaction of balancing her books at the end of a long day. The pride she felt, knowing every plank in that hotel, every plate served, every coin earned, had come from her own grit. She spoke of the quiet thrill in building something with her own hands in a town that respected strength more than pedigree. But she did not tell him she was Elara Quinn. She did not confess the truth at the core of Rowan Frost, the runaway bride, the stolen dowry, the father she had defied. That secret remained locked behind her ribs. Yet with every late evening conversation in the lamplit common room, with every shared silence that felt heavier than words, the urge to tell him grew sharper. She wanted him to know her. Not the widow in black silk, not the careful guarded innkeeper. The real woman underneath. She wanted to peel away the last lie and stand before him without armor. Fear held her back. What if the truth shifted his gaze? What if he saw not courage but deceit, a liar, a thief, a runaway daughter? What if knowing the full story shattered the fragile electric thread that bound them? She feared that once he saw the frightened woman beneath her calm authority, he would step away. That he would leave her with nothing but her walls and the echo of what might have been. So she kept silent. And still whatever lay between them grew. Each time Talon returned from the mountains, dust and wind at his back, the connection deepened. It thickened in the air like a coming storm. She could not deny it. She could not outrun it. The pull between them was undeniable, steady simmering beneath every exchange. When they spoke, she felt hyper-aware of him. The width of his shoulders, the strength in his hands as they rested against the table, the slow rise and fall of his chest. When his eyes settled on her, warmth unfurled through her body, flushing her skin, awakening places she had long believed numb. She began wanting things she had never allowed herself to want. His hands at her waist, his mouth on hers, the weight of him pressing her down into something soft and yielding. She had once been promised to Ambrose Kincaid, prepared to endure whatever marriage demanded. But she had never desired him. She had assumed desire belonged to other women, the reckless, passionate sort. She believed she had been carved from colder stone. Talon was proving her wrong. He was teaching her that wanting was not weakness, that her body could answer another's presence, that the heat rising in her whenever he looked at her was not shame, it was hunger. And it was growing. She dreamed of him. Dreams vivid enough to leave her breathless when she woke. Dreams that sent heat pooling low in her belly, forcing her to press her thighs together in confusion and ache. In those dreams, his hands were deliberate, certain. He touched her with patience and thoroughness, learning her the way he studied trails and terrain. She woke restless, aching, days blurred into sharp awareness. Every nerve tuned to the sound of his boots on the stairs, every sense alert to the possibility of contact. Still she did nothing. She retreated into Rowan Frost when the tension climbed too high. Professional, composed, distant. And Talon respected it. He did not push, did not corner, did not claim. He remained, watching, waiting. His patience unsettled her more than force ever could have. He seemed to understand that walls built over years could not fall in a single night. He gave her space when she withdrew, and nearness when she allowed it. All the while, his dark eyes held steady, seeing everything, demanding nothing. Months passed. He came and went with the seasons, vanishing into the mountains, returning with quiet certainty. The same room, the same table, the same silence charged with meaning. Elara felt herself weakening. The resistance she had clung to began to splinter under the weight of her own longing. The walls she built so carefully were no longer solid. They were cracking. She wanted him. Not in passing, not in imagination alone. The wanting lived inside her, now steady and relentless, a hunger that gnawed at her ribs, a need that sharpened with each passing day. She wanted his hands on her skin. She wanted his mouth claiming hers. She wanted to know what it felt like to be touched by a man she chose, to feel pleasure instead of endurance, to give freely instead of surrendering out of obligation. But fear still coiled around that hunger. Fear and desire knotted together so tightly she could not separate them. Each fed the other until she lay awake, exhausted, frustrated, desperate for something to break. Tonight had begun like any other. The hotel was quiet, just a handful of guests, the usual weekday hush before the miners flooded the town come Friday night. She moved between kitchen and dining room, with efficient grace, overseeing supper as she always did. Talon sat at his usual table, eating in silence, observing the room with that calm attention that seemed to miss nothing. She felt his gaze follow her movements, the familiar flutter igniting low in her belly. She told herself it meant nothing. Just another evening. But the air felt different, charged. When she glanced at him, his expression was not the patient stillness she had grown used to. There was something harder there. Decided. One by one, the other guests finished their plates and drifted upstairs. Chairs scraped. Doors closed. The dining room emptied until only Talon remained seated in the dim glow of dying firelight. The flames had burned low, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Outside, the town settled into night-distant voices, fading a horse stamping somewhere in the dark. Elara gathered the last of the dishes, acutely aware of him, aware of the way his gaze tracked her every movement. Her hands trembled just slightly as she stacked the plates. Her hands trembled as she stacked the last of the plates, and she knew Talon saw it. He noticed everything. He would understand what that slight shake meant. Fear. Hunger. A woman standing at the edge of a cliff she could never climb back from. She heard the scrape of his chair against the floorboards. Slow. Certain. Then the steady sound of his boots crossing the room toward her. Elara kept her gaze lowered, fixed on porcelain and silver, as though the world depended on their careful arrangement. She held her posture rigid, clinging to the last pieces of Rowan Frost's composure, even as she felt it cracking inside her chest. He stopped behind her. Close. Close enough that she felt the warmth of his body through layers of fabric. Close enough that the air changed. Close enough that breathing suddenly felt deliberate. She could not move, could not turn, could only stand there and wait. Elara. Her real name in his voice struck like lightning. He had never spoken it before. To him she had always been Rowan Frost, the respectable widow, the guarded innkeeper. But now he knew. Slowly she turned. He stood so near she had to lift her chin to meet his eyes. What she found there stole the air from her lungs. The patience she had come to rely on was gone. What remained was hunger. Controlled, barely. How she whispered. He gave a faint shake of his head. I've known for a while. His voice was low, steady, unmistakably sure. I'm a tracker. I see what others overlook. The way you stiffen when someone mentions your late husband. The way your eyes drift when you tell parts of that story. Small cracks, little details no one else bothers to notice. He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. I notice you. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Exposure washed through her, but beneath it, something startling. Relief. For 3 years she'd carried that secret alone. Now it stood between them, visible, undeniable. Are you going to turn me in? She asked quietly. Again he shook his head. I'm not going to do anything, Talon said. Your story belongs to you. I just needed you to know I see you. Not the widow. Not the name you wear like a coat. You. His voice softened. I've seen her for months, and she's beautiful. The word hit her like a blow. Beautiful. Not the dress. Not the role. Her. You don't know what you're saying, she breathed. You don't know what I've done. Her voice trembled now, but she did not stop. I stole from my own family. I ran from a wedding that had already been announced. I've lied to this entire town for 3 years. She swallowed. I'm not beautiful. I'm a liar, a thief, a coward. You are none of those things. Talon's voice cut through hers, not harsh, but firm as bedrock. You're a woman who refused to be sold off like livestock. You're a woman who ran when staying would have broken you. You built this place from nothing but nerve and stubborn will. His jaw tightened slightly. That's not cowardice, that's strength. He held her gaze unwavering, and I've been falling in love with that strength for months. The words seemed to echo in the empty dining room. Falling in love. Elara stared at him, her thoughts scattering like startled birds. He saw through the lies, through the defenses, through every wall she had built, and he loved what he found. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything tonight. Talon replied quietly. You don't have to choose anything. I just needed you to know there's nothing shameful in what you are. He stepped closer. Now only inches separated them. She could see each dark lash framing his eyes. She could smell leather wood smoke and the clean edge of sage clinging to his skin. I've been patient, he murmured. His voice lowered, intimate now. I've waited hoping you'd trust me, hoping you'd let me in. I'd wait longer if you needed. I'd wait years. His breath brushed her cheek. But waiting hasn't been easy. The control in his tone thinned. Every night I've slept upstairs knowing you were right below me. It's been a kind of torture. I've wanted you since the first moment I walked through that door. Her breath grew shallow. Heat bloomed beneath her skin, despite the cooling embers in the hearth. I've wanted to touch you, to hold you, to know what you taste like. The air between them felt electric. Talon, she whispered. His name on her tongue felt different now. Heavy, surrendering. Tell me to stop, he said. The words were steady, but the strain behind them was unmistakable. Tell me you don't want this and I'll walk away. I'll go back upstairs. We won't speak of it again. I'll remain your guest. You'll remain my hostess. This moment will disappear. He reached out. His hand settled at her waist. The touch was gentle, barely pressure through the fabric of her dress. But Elara felt it everywhere. Heat flared outward from that single point, racing across her skin through her veins, lighting every nerve awake. She drew in a sharp breath of the sound slipping from her lips before she could stop it. In the hush of the dining room, it felt thunderous. Talon's expression shifted just slightly. A flash of hunger, a trace of satisfaction. Then discipline snapped back into place. Tell me to stop, he said again. His voice roughened, now strained tight with restraint. Say it, Elara, and I will. She knew she should. She knew every board in this hotel, every hard-earned dollar, every fragile piece of the life she had built could splinter if this went wrong. Trusting him with her body when he already held her secrets was a risk that could undo her completely. But she did not tell him to stop. And if I don't, she whispered. Something flared in his eyes, bright, fierce, long-banked, and ready to blaze. Then I'm going to show you what's been on my mind for months, Talon said quietly. I'm going to touch you the way I've wanted to since the first day I saw you behind that desk. His voice deepened. I'm going to learn every inch of you slow and steady until you forget you were ever afraid of being known. I won't treat you like property. I won't treat you like something bought and owned. I will treat you like something sacred. His hand slid from her waist to her hip, drawing her closer. The solid heat of him pressed against her. She felt the unmistakable evidence of his desire against her stomach. His muscles trembled beneath his control. Tell me to stop, he said once more, and this time it sounded almost like a plea. No, Elara breathed. Don't stop. The words came from somewhere deep. I've been waiting too. I've wanted this too. I've lain awake thinking about it, dreaming about it. Ache after ache. Her voice broke softly. Don't stop, Talon. Show me. That was all it took. She saw the last thread of restraint snap. The patience he had worn like armor gave way to raw need. He stepped forward. She stepped back instinctively, the movement pulling them into a rhythm neither of them questioned. Her back struck the dining room wall, solid wood against her spine. Talon followed. Now there was no space left between them. The heat of him surrounded her, trapped her in the best possible way. Escape was impossible. She did not want to escape. His hand moved from her hip to the small of her back, pressing her flush against him. His other hand rose to cradle her face, palm warm against her cheek fingers, threading into her hair. He tipped her chin up until their eyes locked. Everything else vanished. Desire, reverence, love, need. She saw a man who had waited with stubborn patience for her to be ready. A man who knew her truth and did not flinch. A man who looked at her like she mattered more than the whole town outside those walls. A man who was ready to consume her, but only if she allowed it. I've wanted this, Talon said, his voice low and thick with feeling. Since the first moment I walked through your door and saw you standing there. His breath brushed her lips. I've wanted to know how you taste. To feel you against me. To hear you say my name when there's no one else in the world to hear it. His mouth hovered an inch from hers, close enough that her pulse thudded wildly, close enough that the slightest movement would close the gap. She waited for him to kiss her. He did not. He held still, suspended between hunger and restraint. Don't move, he whispered. Elara froze, every nerve strained toward him. Her body trembled with tension so sharp it nearly hurt. She wanted to close the distance herself, wanted to end the sweet torture. But something in his voice held her steady. I need you to understand something, Talon murmured, his lips still hovering near hers. I'm not taking anything from you tonight. His breath mingled with hers. You are choosing. Every touch, every kiss, every moment. I won't be like the man they tried to hand you over to. Ambrose Kincaid's shadow flickered in her mind and vanished. I won't use you, Talon continued. Nothing happens unless you want it. She swallowed. I understand. If you tell me to stop at any point, I will. One word, one look, and I'll step back. I won't touch you again if that's what you decide. His jaw tightened. The effort it took for him to remain still was written in every line of his body. But if you don't stop me, he said slowly, then I'm going to worship you. His voice dropped deeper. I'm going to learn every inch of you. I'm going to show you things you've never felt. I'm going to take my time. And when I'm done, you will never doubt that you are worthy of being known, of being wanted, of being loved. Tears burned at the corners of Elara's eyes, not from fear, from the overwhelming relief of being seen. Tears shimmered in Elara's eyes, not born of fear, not of regret, but of something far deeper. Relief. The kind that comes when a person has been hiding for so long they forget what sunlight feels like. She had run for years, hidden, guarded every breath, every truth. And yet, here stood a man who had tracked her without chasing, who had seen through her defenses and offered not condemnation, but love. "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. The words felt like a lock turning open inside her chest. "I don't want to run anymore. I don't want to hide. I'm tired of being afraid." Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "I want you, Talon. All of you. I've wanted you for so long. I'm done pretending otherwise." A low sound escaped him, half relief, half hunger, and then finally his mouth found hers. The kiss was unlike anything she had known. It began slow, deliberate. His lips moved against hers, as if memorizing them, learning the curve and softness of her mouth. He kissed her as a man studies a map he intends to follow to the end. Warmth, pressure, the faint scrape of his jaw along her skin. She felt herself soften against him, years of restraint dissolving like frost beneath rising sun. Then the kiss deepened. His tongue brushed the seam of her lips, and she opened without hesitation. She let him in, let him taste her. The thoroughness of it weakened her knees. He explored patiently, attentive to every small sound. She made every breath that hitched. He kissed her like he had all night. His body pressed firmly against hers, pinning her to the wall. She felt his strength at the heat of him, the clear proof of his desire against her hip. His muscles quivered under restraint. She slid her arms around his neck and drew him closer, desperate to erase the last inch of space between them. After years of untouched solitude, she wanted to drown in sensation. His hands began to roam over her, moving through the fabric of her dress, down the curve of her waist, over her hips, along her spine. He traced her as though committing her shape to memory, discovering what had been hidden beneath black mourning silk for 3 long years. Every touch sparked awareness. Nerves she had forgotten came alive beneath his hands. Flesh, blood, heat. She was no longer a shadow behind a name. When they finally broke apart for breath, both of them breathing hard, Elara looked up at him through heavy-lidded eyes, dazed with want. "Not here," Talon murmured, his voice low and rough. "Not where someone could walk in." He rested his forehead briefly against hers. "Come upstairs. Let me love you properly. Behind a locked door. We have the whole night." She should have hesitated, should have weighed consequences the way she always did. Reputation, risk, appearances. She was finished calculating. "Yes," she said. "Take me upstairs. Show me what I've been missing." He took her hand. They moved through the quiet hotel, past the front desk, up the narrow staircase. The building was asleep. No doors opened. No voices stirred. The world beyond them faded away. He unlocked his room and drew her inside. The doors shut with a decisive click that felt like sealing themselves off from everything else. He lit a single oil lamp, casting the space in warm gold. When he turned back to her, the same blend of hunger and tenderness remained in his eyes. "Come here," he said softly. Not a command, an invitation. She stepped toward him. This kiss was slower, measured, intentional. His hands found the buttons along the back of her dress. One by one, he worked them open with unhurried care. He did not rush. He savored each small release, as though every undone button was a promise fulfilled. When the last fastening slipped free, he eased the fabric from her shoulders. The black dress slid down her arms and pooled at her feet. She stood before him in her undergarments, more exposed than she had allowed anyone to see her in years. Vulnerability flickered through her, awareness of every flaw, every curve. But Talon looked at her as though she were something rare and sacred. "Beautiful," he said quietly. Not flattery, not exaggeration. A reverent truth. "I've imagined this more times than I can count. But I never did it justice." He stepped closer, pressing a slow kiss to her shoulder, then to her collarbone, then to the hollow of her throat, each kiss deliberate, thoughtful, almost worshipful. He was learning her, mapping her skin with his mouth the way he mapped mountain trails, memorizing, honoring. "Your turn," she managed, breath unsteady. "I want to see you." He stepped back and stripped off his shirt, revealing a broad chest marked with faint scars, stories carved into muscle. Then his boots, his trousers, until he stood before her without barrier. She let her gaze travel over him the way he had studied her. Lean, strong, built by wind and work, bronze skin warmed by lamplight. She wanted to know every line of him. She reached out and placed her palm against his chest. His heart pounded hard beneath her hand. His muscles trembled slightly, not from doubt, from restraint. "Touch me," Talon said quietly. "Anywhere you want, however you want. Tonight we learn each other." Elara did. Her hands moved over him, slowly tracing muscle and bone, mapping the lines of his body the way he might read a trail through open country. She felt the ridges of his ribs, the firm plane of his stomach, the strength in his shoulders. Her fingertips brushed over old scars that told stories she would ask about someday when there was time for stories. Then he finished undressing her. The last of her garments fell away, and she stood before him with nothing left to hide. Not just bare in body, but bare in soul. No Rowan Frost, no careful facade. No polished mask built to survive Victor Quinn's world. Only Elara Quinn. And Talon looked at her as if that was enough. They moved to the narrow bedskin, meeting skin for the first time. The contact stole her breath. Every place where they touched sparked awake nerves humming as though roused from a long winter. She felt alive in ways she had nearly forgotten were possible. Talon did not rush. He explored her with steady devotion, learning the sounds she made, the way her body responded, the subtle shifts in her breathing. He treated her not as something to claim, but something to honor. He found places that made her gasp, places that made her cling to him. He built the sensation carefully, layer by layer, until it swelled inside her like rising tide and broke in a wave that left her trembling. And when she came back down, he brought her there again. Each time different, each time deeper. She lost count of how often she unraveled in his arms, lost track of everything but the certainty that he cared more for her pleasure than his own. When at last they joined fully, Talon hovered above her, searching her eyes in silent question. She answered by pulling him down. The closeness overwhelmed her heat pressure, the profound intimacy of being completely connected to another soul. Tears slid from the corners of her eyes, and she could not tell whether they came from joy, relief, or simply the magnitude of it all. He moved slowly at first, watching her carefully. But she wrapped her legs around him, urging him closer, deeper. She wanted all of him, not to be owned, but to choose. They found their rhythm together, built it steadily, let it rise until it felt like something powerful enough to tear down the last wall she had ever built. When she finally broke apart again, the sound that left her throat was wild and unrestrained. And she felt Talon follow his body, tightening his breath, rough against her neck as he whispered her name. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the small bed, both breathing hard skin, warm bodies damp with effort. Transformed. I didn't know Elara whispered against his chest. I didn't know it could feel like that. I thought that was something other women felt. She swallowed softly. I thought I wasn't made for pleasure. Talon brushed his thumb along her shoulder. You were made for joy, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For passion. For every good thing that was kept from you. He rested his forehead against hers. You just needed someone willing to help you find it. You found it, she murmured. You found me. He smiled faintly. I loved what I saw because of what it was, he said gently. Not in spite of it. You aren't a list of flaws to forgive. His hand slid to her cheek. Your strength, courage, a woman who refused to be sold to Ambrose Kincaid, a woman who ran and built something better. He kissed her temples softly. That's not something to overlook. That's something to honor. More tears slipped down her face, but they were no longer heavy. I love you, she said. The words came easily, like they had been waiting their turn. I didn't know I could love anyone. I thought that part of me was broken. But I love you, Talon, in ways I didn't know were possible. I love you too, he answered without hesitation. I've loved you since the first night I walked through your door. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving you deserve every bit of it. They came together again later, slower, softer now. Urgency replaced by certainty. No more doubt, no more fear. They had time. When dawn finally bled, pale light through the window, Elara lay in Talon's arms and felt changed. The fear was still there, somewhere distant. But it no longer ruled her. She had taken the risk she had avoided for 3 years. She had let someone close, and instead of breaking, she had been rebuilt. It had started with his hand at her waist. A simple touch. It had led to a wall at her back, so whisper of, "Don't move." And she hadn't. She had stayed, waited, chosen. She had let him close the distance, let him see her, let him know her. For so long she had been running. Now finally, she had a reason to stay. A reason named Talon, a man who saw her clearly and loved her anyway. She wasn't running anymore. She was home. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.